Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome back to WatchBox. It's that time again. We are waking up with watches, and everything you see is for sale. To purchase or inquire about pricing, reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com. Remember, all references and names are in the description below, and when possible, pricing as well. But we are also looking to build inventory. Sell me a watch, sell me your entire collection. No upper limit on value paid, direct wire transfers. Guys, if you want to sell a watch, we're always buying, and the email address to reach out is the same, tmosso at thewatchbox.com. All right, let's get started. This is possibly the best selection I've ever presented on this show. And we're going to start out with a big piece. The Patek Philippe Aquanaut Travel Time 5164A. This is the Tiffany co-signed, Tiffany retailed version of the 40.8mm stainless steel watch. Now, the paperwork with this watch indicates it was retailed by Tiffany in New York City back in 2014, which was 3 years after this basic 5164A model debuted. It's 40.8mm in stainless steel, and despite the through fittings in the case for the travel time functions, it is still 120 meters water-resistant. Screw-down crown, it's only 10.5mm thick, handsomely hand-finished. You can see the combination of satin and polish on the exterior of the case, the facets of the bezel, satin on the top, polished on the side, and then the integration of the travel time function, so it appears as a flanking mirrored winglet that roughly profiles the same way as the crown guards on the opposite side. So the case symmetry is still quite handsome. Now, you have the ability to hide that second time zone when you don't need it, so it's a much cleaner dial than your typical travel time. Another feature you don't typically see on travel watches is an AM PM indicator for both the local and the reference time. So it's giving you day-night for both the time zone where you are and the time zone where you are not. There's a geosphere cut to the dial, and you can see the same cut to the sub-register, which is not seconds. It is, in fact, a pointer or radial style date. Now, throw this watch on the wrist, you will have the chance to cut the strap because it is a brand new Patek Philippe rubber, or as they like to say, composite strap. Throw this on the wrist, it is very comfortable. When the model debuted in 2011, it was described as the definitive Aquanaut. The first time since the Aquanaut model line's debut in 1997 that the Aquanaut truly was its own thing, rather than a junior sports watch in the shadow of the Nautilus, as there is no dedicated travel time only Nautilus model. There is a chronograph travel time, but there is no direct Nautilus equivalent to this watch. It definitely became a landmark model, and the moment when the Aquanaut, figuratively speaking, stood up. And of course, you have that lovely Tiffany signature, which is an excellent taste. That's one feature of the Tiffany signature that is not often enough mentioned. It is quite discreet, compact, and modest. It's a wonderful way to commemorate the genesis of this watch between Patek and Tiffany, a long-lasting marriage, but at the same time to do so without ostentation. This is a lovely watch, and as you can see, mechanically it's identical to the standard 5164. It's got the caliber 324 FUS in the back, and of course free sprungs, 6-position adjustment, anti-magnetic silicone hairspring, 45-hour power reserve, and immaculately hand-finished across all surfaces. Now, if you like this watch, but perhaps your budget's a little bit more modest than a Tiffany-signed Aquanaut travel time, let's talk about a watch that is just as ravishing, impressive, and, in the Western world, rare. This is the subtly green lacquered Bulgari Octo Finissimo Automatic Middle Eastern Edition. Launched back in 2019, it's everything the standard Octo Finissimo Automatic is, but with the addition of lovely and lush dark green lacquered Eastern Arabic numerals on the dial side. Now, throw this on the wrist and it truly impresses. Only 5.2 millimeters thick as my calipers measure. The watch is 40 millimeters in diameter, but it really wears a little bit different than a 40 millimeter round watch because it's only 46.5 millimeters lug to lug. It's not exceptionally broad across the wrist, making it an ideal fit for a smaller wrist. Now, make no mistake, when you see these numerals in person, they are lovely, glossy, and green. They look a little bit black on screen. They are green when seen in person. And you can see just how flat and flush this 5.2 millimeter thick titanium ultra thin really is. Now, taking a quick look at the case back, you can see this is the Bulgari BVL 138 An impressive movement that helped the watch to win the GPHG Men's Watch Prize back in 2017. The caliber is over 36 millimeters in diameter, but only 2.23 millimeters thick. Ultra thin, and you could see handsomely made with a platinum, not gold, not tungsten, platinum micro rotor with ceramic bearings for maximum winding efficiency. It is a 60-hour power reserve in spite of the thin profile, and it is handsomely hand finished with a good deal of manual finishing. It's a combination of mechanical and manual finish, but unlike, for example, an Audemars Piguet that is also a combination, here we see the mirrored bevels truly are rounded and glossy. They are not a crude machine filed straight edge. They are rounded and mirrored, and those are hand-laid bevels. Undoubtedly started with a machine, but finished the old-fashioned way. A truly special watch inside and out, and one of the rarest versions of this watch that you will encounter. Estimates of production of this watch range from about 1,000 to 2,000 pieces for the 2013 model year. Rarely seen and only briefly built, this is the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch, nicknamed the Tintin because of the use of this checkered white and red pattern that matches that on the famed comic strip Tintin, and that was the color scheme of the rocket in which he flew. So this watch is quite literally an interpretation of that rocket. It was officially agreed that there would be a Tintin co-branded limited edition of the Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch because, of course, this is the rocket he took to the moon. The agreement fell through, and so for 2013, the same watch as intended was modeled, albeit without the Tintin co-branding, but there is no mistaking the lineage of this design. You can also see that on the reverse side, it's a little bit unique, as the typical Moonwatch signature here is rendered in a red lacquer rather than the more conventional black. So the caseback actually matches the dial in that regard. It is a plexiglass, and you can see that to good effect, especially with the distortion off axis. Inside, caliber 1861 Lemania-based Moonwatch caliber, cam, lateral clutch, 18 joules, 48-hour power reserve, and 21.6 beat rate. It is a handsome, colorful, and fun-loving watch. If you find the Moonwatch a little bit too institutional and dour, spice it up with the Tintin again. With only about 1,000 to 2,000 made, and the model already highly regarded and considered collectible, this is a great way to enjoy a watch every day while still banking on some long-term appreciation on collector markets. A real fun piece to wear, and at 42 millimeters in steel, full-sized without being oversized, and mechanically identical to the watch NASA was flying at the time. So a real Moonwatch with Moonwatch lineage. Let us decide whether one or two is more fun. As with the Doublemint commercials, you gotta double your fun, double your exposure to collectible FP Journe. Now, both of these watches in platinum, 38 millimeters, yellow gold dial, and brass caliber. We have here the tourbillon remontoir. This is a Series 4 watch, and you can tell because it has the larger printed power reserve scale, roughly symmetrical to the minutes on the time dial. It also has the flat remontoir cock and the small screws on the dial, so you know this is a 4th series watch. But everyone also knows that if you want the most collectible of FP Journe tourbillon wristwatches, you want one of the tourbillon remontoir, any of the first 4 series, as well as the ruthenium watches. Now, this timepiece is in outstanding condition, part of a series that was made somewhere between probably about 320 and 480 watches from 1999 to mid-2004. These are super collectible, taking the original FP Journe tourbillon remontoir tandem and moving it into limited production. Of course, back in 1991, FP Journe drew a watch that was very similar to this one, and he built his prototype, which had the power reserve indicator, the tourbillon, and then the remontoir d'égalité constant force device. And you can see that linear spring, there's a separate escapement that buffers between the mainspring barrel and the escapement. And that separate escapement, which meets out 1-second bursts of energy, that's what you're seeing right here, it actually provides the direct energy to the escapement. The barrel, for the first 28 hours of power reserve, does not drive the tourbillon directly. And that is how FP Journe manages to achieve constant amplitude of the balance for 28 hours. Wind it daily, and it is a constant force, constant amplitude movement. Now, you can also see that it's free sprung, adjusted in 6 positions. You can't see that, but take my word for it. You can see that it's free sprung, that it has a Breguet overcoil hairspring, and that overcoil is the last piece of the puzzle that allows the watch to keep excellent time in any orientation, because a Breguet overcoil has centered mass and breathes concentrically. There is a power reserve indicator, and you can see it moves backwards just like a marine chronometer, because with deck clocks, or navigation clocks as they were also called, world, it was always important to wind them 24 hours apart, so it was more important to know how many hours since a full winding than how many hours of runtime remained. You can also see that it's lovely in its finish. These are a little bit better finished than the first 3 series watches, and you can see that F.P. Journe watchmakers have gone to town with the black polish on the remontoire cock, the half bridge for the tourbillon carriage, as well as the tourbillon cage itself. A truly good-looking watch, and at 38 millimeters, universally wearable. The dial is lustrous, handsomely varnished, as these early F.P. Journe watches tend to be. It's got a little bit of a glossy gleam to it, and there's no oxidation, tarnish, or uneven aging of the dial as there often is on these early Journe watches. Now, if you want the ultimate in collectability, this is a French-made Eleanor case, discontinued. It has the year of case manufacture stamp, 03, that's a discontinued feature. The brass movement, that's a discontinued feature. Tourbillon remontoire, a discontinued feature. And 38 millimeters, a discontinued case size. But if you really want the brass ring, well, brass movement brass ring, we should say, you would get both of these watches, because it's often said if you want the iconic F.P. Journe, you get a tourbillon remontoire or you get a first series chronometer-certified, and that is exactly what we have here. A Resonance 1, as it's sometimes called, you can see it too features a brass movement, and it too features a French-made Eleanor case. It too features the caseback year of case manufacture stamp, and it too is a yellow gold dial, thickly varnished, inside a 38 millimeter platinum case. Throw it on the wrist, and it wears exactly the same as the tourbillon remontoire. 44.5 millimeters lug to lug, super slim, very graceful, a viable unisex option. I really feel these watches together as a combination are more than the sum of their parts because of what they represent in terms of collector potential, but they're also fun to wear. The nice thing about the chronometer-certified is that it is a dual time. It is also a resonance watch, but you can set these 2 dials independently and register 2 time zones. You've got the power reserve, it works the same way as on the tourbillon, and then because it takes resonance coupling of these 2 separate escapements, about 7 to 10 minutes to fully take purchase. You might notice that the seconds hands are not synchronized, so there's a flyback mechanism down at 4 o'clock so you can synchronize those hands. Now on the reverse side, you have a brass movement, 42 hours power reserve for each one. Mainspring barrel, click spring, click, power train, escapement, and then a balance. And so you have 2 separate movements in one case. There is no mechanical link between them. It is the emanations, the frictional and aerodynamic losses. I guess they're 2 things: aerodynamic losses and frictional losses due to mechanical interface, that is metal to metal. And those energies radiate out and they cause these 2 sides to couple to each other, just like metronomes or pendulums placed in proximity will synchronize. The idea being if one gets knocked askew, either running too fast or too slow, or varies because of physical position with respect to gravity, the other will mutually reinforce and either speed up or slow down the other balance to keep everything regulated. That is why it is described as a resonance chronometer. Now, F.P. Journe's 3rd ever pocket watch, made during the 80s, was an attempt to realize this system for the first time ever in a watch. It didn't work, but his wristwatch version, launched in 2000, this series did work, becoming a famous world premiere that to this day is still unerringly precise. These 2 movements in one case will stay synchronized. It is a very cool thing to observe. From Geneva to Les Brassus and the Vallée de Joux, we have Audemars Piguet, a neighbor of Breguet and also Jaeger-LeCoultre, Philippe Dufour, and Romain Gauthier. Audemars Piguet in the Vallée de Joux is most famous for the Royal Oak. And this right here is the reference 15202, or the Jumbo, the closest living relative to Gerald Genta's seminal 1972 5402 Royal Oak Jumbo. The 15202 here in F series, as built from 2000 to 2011, has a number of lovely and evocative references to that original Genta model. Now I'm going to pop open the clasp here. You can see it is a logo style single fold, 39 millimeters in diameter, 8.2 millimeters thick, super slim. It lives up to its ultra thin billing, and you can see this one has the most desirable blue galvanized dial, which due to a high rejection rate during the galvanizing process was generally reserved to AP boutiques and absolutely premier AP dealers. You can see how flat the watch is. You can also see how nicely finished it is. With these Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Jumbos, you're really paying for the metallurgy and the finishing outside. You can see white gold hexagonal belts inside a stainless steel bezel that's a rounded octagon inspired by a vintage diving helmet. You have both satin finish and polished elements. The bracelet itself takes 9 to 11 hours to finish manually, and you can see why with all the individual and micrometric polished and satinated facets. You can also see that the watch features a expressed bezel gasket between the bezel and the case. That's always been part of the design. Hexagonal crown to match that of the bezel bolts, and then the reverse side, you've got caliber 2121, which is based on the 1967 JLC 920 Bausch, which was created for Patek, Vacheron, and Audemars Piguet, used by those three, never used by Jaeger-LeCoultre. The movement's finished in a different fashion for each of the three original users. Now, this is the same movement that originally powered the 1972 Royal Oak, so this watch stays very close to the original. It also uses the monoblock construction that Genta originally envisioned for the sake of water resistance. So you can see the case back here as well as the mid case. It's all one piece with a hole cut in the back for the sapphire, but there is no seam between the case back and the case band. That changed in 2017 as Audemars Piguet somewhat cheapened the jumbo, but this watch from the F series in the 2000s is still monoblock case. You can also see that the rotor itself used to be a much more elaborate piece compared to how it's finished on the current jumbo. It is skeletonized here and immaculately beveled internally. And you can see that it is the Audemars Piguet AP logo. Today, it is a principally mechanical execution, so these 2000 to 2011 jumbos have a much more artisanally finished and exhaustively finished rotor. The rest of the movement is classical 920 Bausch or 2121. It has a beryllium rotor that rings the movement, and then there are 4 pivot jewels, one at each of the 4 corners. The rotor sits on top of those jewels. You can see it is a full annular rotor system. It goes all the way around. So while the mass is only on one side, it is a full circular rotor. There's a Gyromax style free sprung balance. It's a 19.8 beat rate, which is a little bit anachronistic because this is an older movement architecture, but the basic movement is still ultra thin at only 2.4 millimeters thick, 40-hour power reserve, and a wonderful piece adjusted in a chronometer style 5 positions, beautifully made inside and out. A lovely and classical Audemars Piguet that is the Audemars Piguet to own if you're going to own just one. That said, this is somewhat of a peripheral in the Rolex catalog, but what the Deepsea is Rolex's most sophisticated diving instrument. Launched in 2008, the 44mm 904L steel SeaDweller Deepsea, or Deepsea Sea Dweller to be precise, is a monstrous 12,800 foot or 3,900 meter diver. I know they're not exactly equivalent, but we're going to get as close as we can there. And the watch at 44 millimeters is substantial. You'll also note the caseback, made of titanium, is the only titanium component you will find on a Rolex watch. It has Rolex's best diving clasp because it can be sized while still on the wrist. You do so like this. You lift up the sawtooth lock, and once the lock is released, you have the ability to incrementally size up to 20 millimeters in 2mm increments. Want more? You got it. In addition to this glide lock system, you have flip lock for over 50 millimeters, or for those of us in the former British colonies, 2 inches of full extension. So you can use it for sizing, or you can use it all the way out over a diving suit or a winter coat. Now, the reason you'd want to incrementally size is because you can use this to fine-tune the fit. Throw it on the wrist. You can see that crystal, over 5 millimeters thick, is so thick that the watch does not have a cyclops eye, which endows the watch with greater water resistance, but also greater dial symmetry and beauty. You can see it's a thick watch, no doubt. It's not one to fit underneath the cuff. I think my wrist is even a little bit undersized for it. The Mark II, made from 2018 forward, will fit on my wrist, but I recommend you have a wrist of at least 17 centimeters circumference to ride this ride. You'll also appreciate it does have the helium escape valve on the side, and Rolex actually tests all of these watches to 25% past their rated depth before they leave the factory. They use equipment co-developed with Comex, so this watch has actually been down to 12,800 feet and then 25% beyond that. It features a wonderful 120 click dive bezel with a ceramic insert, and of course chronometer certified, internally anti-magnetic, and very, very tough. Okay, we go from a deep dive to sky high horology, that is. This is the Breguet Classique Tourbillon 5307BA. 5307 is a 39mm solid gold guilloche dial tourbillon with a 5-day automatic winding power reserve. Wow, that's a lot. Let's get a little bit closer and see what this watch has to offer. Now, this is why you don't chase voguish references from hot independents or mainstream brands just because they populate social media. With Breguet, you get just as much as you get at, say, MB&F or Moser or FP Journe. And I think it's important to note how much you get with this 5307. Let's start with the case. You can see that the case flanks are coined. That's achieved by cold rolling and then hand finishing. You can also see that the lugs are welded on by hand and then double finished to remove evidence of the welded joint. Take a look at the strap. It's held on using screws and bars, not the spring bars that are common in the dress watch segment. More expensive, but also more secure. The dial is made of solid gold, cut on a rose lathe, real guilloche mat, as you see at the base of the dial. And that means it is hand guilloche, done by a guillocheur who first draws the pattern and then programs the lathe with cams to create the pattern you see here. Now, the dial is made of solid gold. It's cut on the rose lathe, and then it's silvered to give you what you have here. The Breguet hands, as well as the screws mounting the tourbillon bridge, are all fired blue from steel. The tourbillon is a 1-minute tourbillon. As you can see, free sprung. It features an overcoil hairspring, and yes, it is a Breguet overcoil hairspring. Turn it all over, and an embarrassment of riches, as the twin mainspring barrel automatic winding 5-day movement is entirely hand skeletonized, and as you can see, even down to the rotor, engraved. Beautifully engraved in Baroque fashion. You could see that no detail was overlooked, with a number of different styles: Art Nouveau, banknote scrolling, geometric, everything you could possibly want in high horology laid out from a company that will be around forever to provide parts and service for this watch. You can see it's adjusted in 5 positions, and of course Breguet wants you to remember that back in 1801, on June 26th, I believe it was, Breguet patented the first watch tourbillon. And at only 39 millimeters, just about any wrist is welcome to wear and enjoy this piece. 39 millimeters is perfect for a modern men's dress complication. Super slim. You can see, in spite of the power reserve, the complication, and the automatic winding, it easily slides underneath the cuff. A wonderful watch. Even if your wrist is under 14 centimeters circumference, this is a monstrous, massively hand-finished, handmade, and rare, elite-level complication from an elite-level brand. This is Breguet at its best. You can even see, if you get a little bit closer, the so-called secret signature, the Breguet signature, is up on the top of the dial. A very special watch and a great opportunity. That represents value in the marketplace. Now we're going to talk about another great value, Alango Unzona. This is a company out of Saxony. It's only been around since 1990 in its modern iteration, but it's acquired a reputation, deserved, as the German Patek Philippe. And truly, it is that, but it's also something more. Let me grab my polishing cloth. There is a wonderful ambition to the way they do things, and in 2011 they launched this watch. This is the Zeitwerk striking, and you can see that this watch strikes on the hour as well as the quarters. It also has digital jumping time. Just like that. A timepiece, 44.2 millimeters in white gold. It strikes, again, the hours and the quarters. It has digital jumping time if you want to play with it, and I can't imagine you wouldn't. It has a quick set system that adjusts forward and backwards, a power reserve indicator. There is a hacking seconds function. You can see that both the gongs and the strikers themselves are immaculately black polished, and the so-called time bridge framing the hours, the seconds, and the minutes is actually part of the movement on the dial side. Turn it all over, it gets even better on the caseback. The movement caliber L0432 is manual wind with a black polished stop works to prevent you from overwinding the watch, but also to prevent it from discharging past the point that it can no longer jump the time. There is a wonderful black polished and satinated, a stainless steel bridge that contains the remontoire system. There's a constant force device so that the barrel never directly drives the escapement because of the force of that mainspring, which has to be physically anchored at one end to the base plate. There's simply too much strength and force in that mainspring to directly drive the balance. It would damage and overdrive the escapement. So instead you have this buffer system where every minute the energy jumps the minutes, and then it travels through a pinwheel or air brake into a locking lever. You can see the second pallet system just below my finger, and then there's a double third wheel with a hairspring between them. That's the remontoire spring, and every minute the mainspring barrel tops up that spring. That spring in turn directly drives the escapement to maintain constant amplitude. Just as we saw on the Journe tourbillon, this watch has a constant force device. Freehand engraving on the balance cock and the cock for the escape wheel. You can also see black polish, jewels set in golden chaton, just as in the pocket watch era. And note the bridges and plates are all a golden hue because of the nickel copper zinc German silver alloy from which they are made. There is also an overcoil here, and it is free sprung. That is a feature you generally don't find on Alango watches. So a highly refined, high-tech, traditionally finished movement from one of the finest in the business. Lange, to me, is a independent that just happens to be owned by a group. I've always felt that they continue to be very independent in the way they build, finish, and conceive watches, and the Zeitwerk, in spite of being created under Richemont ownership, very much is of that modern-day independent streak in high horology. And let's not speak too loudly about it, because Richemont might remember that it owns Lange and spoil the party. Great looking watch, and also, as you can see, a simple, no-nonsense white gold pin buckle. By the way, the black parts of the style, sterling silver black galvanized. This watch right here might be the best of the modern breed of integrated bracelet sports watches, because while everyone else in the industry was copying the Gerald Genta look and pretty much ripping off Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe, Moser said, we're going to go with the idea of integration, but we don't want our watch to look anything like theirs. And so for the 2020 model year, they launched first the Streamliner flyback chronograph, and then this. This is the Streamliner center seconds with a Moser matrix green fumé fade dial and a material called Global Light. It's a ceramic type material that's applied to the hands. It is a solid block of luminova. Now you can see the matrix green fumé fade is lovely, from almost a toxic green at its center to black at its edge with applique polished indices, screw down crown, 120 meters water resistant, about 12.5 millimeters thick, 40 millimeters in diameter, with a lovely integrated bracelet that seems almost organic. I mean, you can really tell this is nothing like what AP and Patek were doing with integration. This feels more like the tail of a lobster or some sort of segmented body annelid. It's just incredibly gorgeous, and it's seamless too. There's no daylight showing here. You can also see that it's polished internally and satinated externally, so it has a handsome contrast. From any angle, you can see Moser cases are interesting. They always feature handsome recesses and sculpting. Throw this watch on the wrist, it is quite special. Maybe this is our time for a loom shot here, but you can see on my 16 centimeter circumference wrist, super comfortable, flat enough to be your dress watch, 120 meters water resistant, automatic winding, and as you can see on the reverse side, it's got a sports watch movement with that Rolex-like a free-sprung balance and full balance bridge for shock resistance. Moser making its own balances, hairsprings, and escapements. So a fully integrated manufacturer. And of course, this watch also with a 3-day automatic winding power reserve and hacking seconds. Let's see if we can't organize ourselves a quick loom shot. I'm gonna bring the Deepsea back. We'll do a loom shot of the Moser. We'll make the rounds. Okay, there you can see Global Light from the Moser. Right here is the Tintin. And then right here is the Deepsea, and that Rolex dive watch pedigree really shining through. This is easily the best loomed watch on the table right now. The Global Light, though, as you can see on the Moser, has an interesting three-dimensional effect since it does stand proud of the hands on which it's mounted. I should mention the Royal Oak I showed you earlier is also loomed, and it's a modern era Luminova watch, not from the Tritium era, so that loom is all original. This watch harks back to a model that Greubel Forsey launched in 2012. Having already demonstrated virtuosity with tourbillon watches in the 2000s, they wanted to demonstrate through Robert Greubel's hand, and he is the principal designer, that they were able to update their aesthetic to be modern and avant-garde, and that is exactly what we have right here with the Greubel Forsey Tourbillon 24 Seconds, and this is the Contemporain model. As you can see, very contemporary indeed. The hour track is mounted by a annular sapphire, and then inboard, we'll get close here, you can see that the upper bridge for the tourbillon is also made of sapphire, creating the effect of a flying tourbillon as the upper bridge is transparent and in no way obscures your view of the 24-second tourbillon. And of course, it is a 24-second tourbillon, making one turn every 24 seconds, twice the speed of a conventional tourbillon regulator. Now, the Contemporain is not just about the use of the sapphires, it is also about the bluing of the movement itself, which has been created in an almost electrifying cobalt tone with a metallic sheen. Power reserve indicator. The watch has a 3-day power reserve manual wind in spite of the energetic angled tourbillon. You can see it's angled at 25 degrees. It has an overcoil hairspring. It's free spring for durability. The idea of this tourbillon is that due to its speed, its angle, and its overcoil, it is going to restore the chronometric intent of a tourbillon, which, after all, Breguet invented to equalize the effects of gravitational deviation on the escapement. By virtue of shifting the position of the hairspring here, Greubel Forsey reclaims the tourbillon's original intent, which was chronometry. On the reverse side, you can see this is number 7 of 33. It is a limited edition. The watch is in red gold. It is 43.5 millimeters, so fairly wearable by Greubel Forsey standards. Note the uncompromising finish. A wire brush is used to frost these bridges. In the past, in the pocket watch era, this would have been done with an acid. The wire brush is more time-consuming and artisanal, while sparing the use of caustic materials. You can see the bluing of the base plate beneath that. Note that the bridge features mile-wide anglage, truly mile-wide. You can appreciate that glossy gleam, finished with gentian wood at the very end of the process, and you can see it without a loop. You can also see that the jewels are set in golden chaton, pocket watch style, and nickel copper zinc here is used just as it was in the Langa to give it that lovely golden-hued pocket watch aesthetic. But take a look at the wheels, because this is where the watch sets itself apart. You can see the inner circumference of the wheels as well as the spokes are beveled to the same degree as the bridges themselves. This is extraordinarily rare because it's hard and expensive to do. Most companies don't bother. With Greubel Forsey, you get that level of attention to detail. The screws here, and you can see both black polished and blued screws, they cost about 100 Swiss franc to make. Full double deployant clasp matching the design of the case, which, as you might note, is remarkably nuanced. These concave mirrored hollows to the lugs, a Greubel Forsey signature that is often overlooked as the watches themselves and the movements tend to take precedence. It is the case itself that is possibly the most unconventional part of the watch, as it includes both the text of Greubel Forsey's philosophy of watchmaking and those handsome lugs. Let's throw this one on the wrist, and heck, let's do a lume shot. A surprisingly practical monster complication. This is the only watch on the table right now that can give the deep sea a run for its money. Throw it on the wrist. My wrist, 16 centimeters in circumference. This is the biggest Greubel Forsey I could wear. I could say if your wrist is down to 15 centimeters circumference, you're going to wear this comfortably. The look is big. It is bombastic, but you don't buy a Greubel Forsey because you're shy. You buy a Greubel Forsey because you love the way they make watches, and you are unabashed about wearing what you love. This is a timepiece that has a ton of presence. It doesn't necessarily have brand cachet, so you're not going to have to deal with the baggage of a brand name. It's not like a Rolex or a Patek in that regard. And you can truly see that that tourbillon carriage flying away is the focal point of the watch, but don't undersell the rest. As you've seen over the last few minutes, this watch is designed as a package with absolutely no expense spared. And that is the same feeling I get when I showcase this 10-piece limited edition rose and white gold Audemars Piguet. This is the Tradition Répétition Minute tourbillon chronograph, a timepiece that is 47 millimeters by only 12.5 millimeters thick, launched in 2013. It is a triple complication with the tourbillon, the chronograph, column wheel chronograph, and of course the minute repeater. It is an impressive watch based on the design of Audemars Piguet timepieces, pocket watches from the 1920s. It's part of the Tradition line that's rarely seen. Big, broad, flat, and immensely comfortable on the wrist. This is a timepiece with an Audemars Piguet Renault et Papy movement, finished and engineered to the nth degree. 10 pieces made in double gold, like you see right here, and then 10 pieces made in titanium, and that is it. 48-hour manual wind, hand-finished column wheel chronograph, minute repeater tourbillon, caliber 2874 on the inside. And as you can see, the dial of this watch is charismatic. Applique and high-polished Breguet-style rose gold Arabic numerals, black polished tourbillon carriage with an overcoil hairspring. Note the extent of the hand finishing on the hands. They are partly skeletonized, open-worked that is, and then rounded across across their tops, a level of detailing you normally only get on the highest level of independent horology. The case is handsomely made. You can see those welded on lugs. Again, old school case construction with a white gold minute repeater slide and a white gold brushed bezel. Note the hairline polishing of the bezel outboard and the combination of polish and satination on the red gold elements. Turn it over and you can see this is a spectacular watch. Tourbillon, répétition, minute, chronographe, a timepiece that is quite literally the ultimate Audemars Piguet tradition. The chronograph and the répétition combining to make for a watch that's entertaining to see and to hear. So let's hear what this watch has to say. In fact, let's hear everything this watch has to say by advancing as close as I can to 1259, which is optimal for minute repeaters. Let's hope I didn't miss there. Yeah, I could run my mouth about how it's finished and the engineering and how much time goes into making each piece of this movement, but I think you've seen it all. If you're not smitten, you really need to check for a pulse. This timepiece is what we love about high horology. This is the 10-piece limited edition 2013 Audemars Piguet Tradition Tourbillon Répétition Minute Chronographe. This is as good as it gets. Reach out to Tim Mosso at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details.